Okay, hi everyone. My name is Lisa LaRue, and I am COP lead for the SVRI Faith and GBV Community of Practice. Thank you all for being here. I'm really delighted that you're able to join us. Before we get started, please allow me to just run a few housekeeping things by you. Next slide, please, Clara. So our webinar today will be 60 minutes and it's going to be recorded, and we will be sharing that recording with other COP members, and it will be publicly available as well. All webinar participants are muted, but please introduce yourself in the chat, your name, your organization, and where you're based. Then live interpretation is available in both French and Spanish. So please make use of this if French or Spanish is your preferred language. Now, our webinar today, we've come to the first year of our community of practice, and we're going to be looking back on what we did this year, and that's going to inspire us to also look forward. To give you an overview of this hour, you'll see the agenda on the screen. Liz Dartnell, Executive Director of SVRI, will share with us why SVRI decided to host this community of practice. She's going to be joining us via a recording because as we are meeting here today, she's on a plane, so she can't be here in person, unfortunately. Then representatives from each of our working groups will share with us a bit about what they've been doing over the past year, the outputs they've produced, and what they have planned for the coming year. So I will introduce each speaker before I hand over to them. And then at the end, it's going to come back to me again, where I'll briefly share some of our plans for the coming year. And that is it. I'm confident that this is simple enough that we'll be able to stick to the 60 minutes. And I'm again very happy that all of you are here. I'm now going to hand over to Liz to share with us a bit about why SVRI decided to host this community of practice. Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us for this special closing session of year one of our Faith and GBV Community of Practice. It is really a joy to be with you today as we reflect on the incredible work of the past year, celebrate what has been achieved, and look ahead to the next phase of this important journey. As many of you know, this initiative didn't begin with the SVRI. It was born from the work and vision of many dedicated colleagues, including Tier Fund and the Joint Learning Initiative on Faith and Local Communities. When the initiative needed a new home, we were really honoured to offer one. And with the support of excellent partners and collaborators, we have been proud to carry this work forward and continue the vital conversations that were really already well underway. At the SVRI, we focus on research that makes a difference in preventing and responding to violence against women and violence against children. We are very, very committed to supporting work in low and middle income countries, regions that are underfunded and overlooked when it comes to evidence building. We believe that shifting power in research and strengthening diverse local and cross-sector networks is key to achieving a world free from violence. This community of practice fits perfectly within that vision. Faith communities are powerful actors, deeply rooted, widely trusted, and able to influence attitudes and behaviours in ways few others can. But we know that while faith can be a force for healing, it can also perpetuate harm. And that is why spaces like this are so needed, where we can grapple with these complexities together and work towards inclusive, ethical, and effective approaches to gender-based violence prevention and response. Over the past year, we have been deeply inspired by what this community of practice has achieved. The working groups have done phenomenal work, surfacing critical insights, sparking meaningful dialogue, and contributing practical tools and ideas to the field. You have all helped move this conversation forward in ways that are both thoughtful and bold. And now the good news. I am thrilled to share that we have secured funding for another year of this work. That means we can deepen what has been started, continue building these connections, and take the next steps together. Thank you all for your commitment, your time, and the great heart that you bring to this space. I am really excited for what lies ahead, and we are deeply grateful at the SVRI to be on this journey with you. Thank you again for all that you do, and I really hope that you all enjoy this session. Thank you.
Ah, how lovely that Liz was able to join us, even though she wasn't able to join us. But yes, really great news that we were able to source funding for another year. And that has also inspired us to plan for more than a year. But I will tell more about that at the end of today's session. For now, I want us to focus a bit on the past year and just the amazing work that the three working groups have been doing. So first, we're going to turn to Working Group 1. Now, Working Group 1 is chaired by Rafael. Now, Rafael's originally from Brazil. He's also spent time in South Africa. He's now based in Spain and he's on his way to Brussels. So he's really been all over, and his working group is focused on advancing research on policy at the intersections of gender, religion, and spirituality. And they had quite a specific focus on decolonial approaches and the experiences of young people in faith communities. What's unique about this group is that Rafael and his team really put a lot of effort into bringing together members from Africa and Latin America and creating spaces for South-South learning and knowledge exchange. In steering Working Group 1, Rafael was supported by a co-chair, Sinetemba Makanya, as well as an executive committee, and they will join him in doing this presentation. And Rafael, I'm handing over to you, please.
Thank you, Lisa, for the lovely introduction. I hope we can all see the opening slide for this presentation. As Lisa introduced, I'm here to give you a bit of an overview of what we've done on Working Group 1, the evidence building working group, together with my co-chair, Sinetemba Makanya, and project managers Nobantu Shabangu and Leonardo Andrade. And as Lisa was mentioning earlier, we really made an effort to frame this working group based on its diversity, not only from the perspective of members, but also on the perspective of the executive committee, which is the team that handled the activities of the Working Group 1. And for us, it was very important to have these engagements, these intersectional engagements, as we often say, in terms to build working group activities that are really centered in context-sensitive and decolonial approaches, which we identified here as our core focus, as well as the main theme being the focus on youth. So as I was saying, we try to create this approach, this sort of a methodological approach, anchoring on decoloniality, South-South dialogue, and practice-oriented. Why did you do this? We built up this, co-created this proposal, trying to think on the very own research experiences that we had, the executive team had over the past years, focusing on gender justice, and how we often talk about concepts, but we actually lack tools, mechanisms, and ways to make it happen, to apply these concepts. So for us, this triangle was the core of our working group, the critical areas on evidence building that we'd like to contribute with, having the insights from a diversity of members and audiences with whom we engage with. what does it mean, again, when you talk about these concepts, South-South, the colonial, how do we mean making this feasible, turning this into practice? For us, it was key to engage at the local level in a co-designing research. This means that when we developed our activities, we included members, we included their insights, shared our guidelines, our ideas, in order to have the best approach when trying to focus on particular contexts. We also prioritized knowledge and voices, focusing on those who are most knowledgeable about the fields that we are looking into in GBV prevention in faith context. And for this, we really made an effort to center on testimonies and storytelling, to have an insight on how knowledge is not only based or built through research as an isolated mechanism, but research is actually built by those who participate in it. Those, in this case, the members of our working group. And finally, it was important for us to also get to know what does it mean to use the colonial practices? What does it mean to apply this approach from different perspectives? We often take academic concepts and try to reproduce in standardized ways. But for us, what was important to know is how can we actually understand the coloniality from different localities, from the perspective of different communities. For this to happen, we developed a series of activities, and as I mentioned before, I really thank our executive committee, our executive team that helped us to develop these activities. We developed 4 roundtable discussions and 1 virtual learning event, 5 expert discussion groups. We also built a LinkedIn community and developed a blog series, who also ended up all together turning into a research report and a policy brief. All that, as I mentioned before, intertwined in always trying to discuss, let's say, throughout the process, what we were finding, and even open up the challenges and the problems that we had throughout this process. I'll hand over then now to my colleague, Nobantu Shabango, who will explain a bit more how we worked with the blog series for the working group 1. Go ahead, Nobantu.
Thank you, Rafa. So part of evidence building is reconfigured by what we read as data. Through collecting member narratives, we hoped that the authors would have the opportunity to examine and share their critical and reflexive role in GBV evidence building in the Global South within faith-based contexts. The initial step was to scan the hundreds and hundreds of responses we received from Working Group 1 members, which included, but were not limited to, pastors, traditional healers, policymakers, medical practitioners, activists, NGO practitioners, academics, and artists, and even more. And all of them carried different faith and cultural identities, and also worked with different cultures and identities. And so there was that dilemma or tension. And so the writing workshops played a role in opening up dialogue on the in-depth work that the members were conducting in their respective countries. More importantly, they offered the opportunity for the authors to fashion their stories and creatively in real time from a decolonialist perspective that equally weighs epistemic knowledge that appreciates a bottom-up approach. In the writing workshop, which was online, the authors shared that they were initially drawn to writing on their personal accounts of SGBV, which in turn led them to do the research and advocacy work. The authors were also still in the process of thinking and rethinking their narratives to align with the SVRI guidelines. Therefore, a free write session formed part of the workshop with the idea to creatively stimulate the authors and encourage flexibility with the researcher voice, the artist voice, the activist voice, and the advocate voice. At the end of the session, we had the themes that stood out the most was sex trafficking, promoting interfaith dialogue and allyship with faith leaders, centering migrant survivor voices, complicit masculinity in the army, connections between GBV and teen pregnancy, as well as the link between climate change and SGBV in Africa through examining the ancestral rituals and policy frameworks that legitimize traditional leadership. Can I please have the next slide? Though we had an overwhelming response to the blog call, we had to narrow it down to 5 blog authors. The culminating narratives produced a multidimensional perspectives that bridge the evidence gap in faith context and GB advocacy. Interestingly, the blog series organically connects to the major findings emanating from the Working Group 1 expert group discussions, emphasizing the need to confront incidences of spiritual harm, which interlie with occurrences of GBV incidences in vulnerable populations, such as youth, women, and LGBTQI populations, through foregrounding the reclamation of spiritual spaces by transforming masculinities and adopting feminist praxis. So these are just some of the ways that our 5 contributors added and contributed to the evidence building element of Working Group 1 in faith contexts. I'll hand it over to Snetemba.
Thank you, Nobantu. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Snetemba, as Nobantu has said, and I'll be speaking briefly about the research report as well as the policy brief. So as you've seen that our activities in Working Group 1 were a lot. And in writing the research report and the policy brief, we had to focus on particularly the expert group discussions in order then to give us a foundation on which to look at the results and analyze the data. And so the expert group discussions, which we called as such as opposed to focus group discussions, were again, because of our decolonial thinking and understanding that everyone is an expert in their own lived experience. We were coming in as researchers, but the people who had the information about what was happening on the ground were the people that were going to be part of our expert group discussions. So 5 of these were held virtually between November 2024 as well and April 2025. Each group included about 3 to 5 participants representing diverse geographies, faiths, genders, and roles. These included clergy, youth leaders, researchers, and activists. Overall, we had between 23 to 25 participants. 3 of the expert group discussions were held within the African context, and 2 of them were held within the Latin American context. Again, we had to focus some of, because so much data came up and very complex data, but for the research report, we chose to focus on key questions that were asked of our participants. The 4 questions were: what are the perspectives of young people of faith on gender-based violence within their communities? And what are their key insights and experiences in engaging youth? What are the key insights and views with regards to power minorities, which we called LGBTQI+ individuals, as well as indigenous belief systems and faith-based approaches to gender-based violence? The 3rd question: how can faith-based communities be mobilized more effectively to address gender justice and contribute to long-term prevention of GBV, particularly focusing on the youth? And finally, what are the key differences and similarities between African and Latin American contexts in the experiences of youth engagement in GBV prevention and faith-informed contexts? Can you hear me properly? Sorry. Can I just check? Okay. And as I say, the research report was very long. It was about 70 pages just because of how much data we were able to gather from those different groups. However, we were able then to break it down into 3 key findings. The first finding was around the complexity of youth engagement. And this was across both the African and Latin American contexts. So on the one hand, we found youths as vulnerable to gender-based violence. And on the other hand, we also found them as what we called unwitting perpetrators to gender-based violence. And again, through the different contexts, there were different levels of complexity, different levels of vulnerability. And what came out the most then, when we're speaking about youth mobilization and youth engagement, is that within an African context, youth were able to be mobilized when supported. And so a lot of our practitioners, a lot of our leaders were able to support youth through outreach programs, awareness programs, facilitating sessions for them, educating them, and then capacitating them to be part of the fight against gender-based violence. Interestingly enough, yes.
Snetemba, I'm
Hi.
just being asked if you can slow down a little bit
Ah,
so that our interpreters can just stay with
oh,
you, please.
my
Thank
apologies. I'm going
you.
so fast
No
because
worries.
there's so much to get through and little time. So let me try and slow
Okay.
down. So as I was saying, youth mobilization within the African context revealed itself as being capacitated by leaders, organizations, practitioners. Where interestingly enough, within the Latin American context, we saw youth mobilization coming in and out of the youth, where we saw youth were able to use things like digital platforms, podcasts to lead mobilization against gender-based violence. Can I have the next slide, please? Then we had a finding around key emerging themes when participants were asked. These emerging themes were around LGBTQI plus individuals, and we saw that within the African context, LGBTQI plus didn't even have a language. Some of our African participants found it as taboo and were saying that even though there are individuals that presented as LGBTQI plus, they weren't even able to speak about it within their faith-based contexts. Alternatively, within the Latin American context, we found that, yes, similar to the youth, LGBTQI plus individuals were able to stand up and create awareness around them, but it was another added layer of marginality. So in the Latin American context, a lot came up around race, gender, as well as LGBTQI plus related issues. And then another emergent theme was around culture and religion, which is often entangled, legitimizing harmful masculinities and also offering pathways for moral renewal. So again, you'll see the complexity and the dualities within a lot of our themes that were coming up. What was interesting then about this particular emerging theme is that it seemed more pronounced within the African context that masculinity and toxic masculinity was deeply entangled within both faith and cultural context. Whereas within the Latin American context, yes, masculinity was spoken about. However, in this context, there was a lot of almost binary thinking against faith, as in Christianity, and also what then were called Afro-Latino or Afro-Brazilian or Afro-Argentinian faiths, which then also saw how other alternative theologies also gave a framework for liberation within GBV prevention. In both contexts, we saw that youth and queer voices are challenging different structures by reclaiming spiritual spaces and forging alternative and inclusive theologies. Can I have the next slide? Our third and perhaps for me, most pertinent finding was around evidence building for GBV prevention within these contexts of faith. I think Raphael already mentioned that we found that evidence is more than just data. We found that it was relational in some of the stories and testimonies where our practitioners had to form and forge relationships in order to get some of the information. Please excuse me a little bit. Sorry, I was just asking for silence around me. I'm in a precarious position. And so we found that relationships had to be forged, trust had to be built in order for evidence to be gathered. Within the Latin American context, we found that evidence was very political. So to say that within the Latin American context, we mainly had access to academics, not only because of our own social capital as an executive team, but also because of almost the danger of working within GBV prevention, gender, etc., within the Latin American context. And overall, we found that, again, gathering of evidence was more than just data, but it was also spiritual. Our participants really saw the importance of building evidence in relation to amplifying silenced voices, in informing programming, but also to give it back to spiritual authority to hold them into account. I won't go in great detail about the numerous challenges that were spoken about in evidence-based gathering, but in short, challenges around methodology, challenges around capacity, challenges around informed consent when ethical clearance boards are almost evasive in such contexts. Can I please have the next slide? And I must just say that please do read the report because it is so comprehensive, it is so thorough, and really shows us the differences in the contexts. The policy brief almost tried to translate what the research report offered us to bite-sized chunks. The two documents speak hand to hand, and what I will speak on then in terms of the policy brief are the recommendations that came to the fore. And these recommendations were to these recommendations were to faith-based organizations and faith actors, they were to policymakers, they were to donors, and they were to researchers. I won't go into the intricacies of each because, again, time, but just as kind of a bite-sized chunks, one of the recommendations were to create systems that support survivors and help prevent GBV in faith communities. The second one was really to engage youth as agents of change. For this one, it is very important, again, to think about the context and how youth mobilize in the different contexts in order then to be able to properly and appropriately respond to this recommendation. Third, we spoke about, or the recommendation was about addressing masculinities across and beyond interventions. And so a lot of the interventions that came from the participants we were speaking to in our expert group discussions were around transformative masculinity, but working with the cultural and religious landscapes in order to see what transformative masculinity means within different contexts. And finally, it was around building faith-aligned, inclusive evidence systems. A lot of our participants spoke about how the funders asked for a different form of evidence that we can't quite collect from where we're sitting and in our engagement with our different communities. And so the recommendation is about how about we align how we gather evidence so that we can speak to both contexts. And I know I went pretty quick. I hope this was a way to say, please do read the report as well as the policy brief. And I'm going to hand over to Raphael.
Thank you so much, Sinatema, for this hard work because it is very rich. I must say, this report, we're very proud of it. And I will then hand over to Lisa so we can continue hearing the amazing work done by the other two working groups. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Raphael and Abantu and Sinitema. Before we move over to Working Group 2, Raphael has just been offered and has accepted a post as the Ethics and Integrity Advisor at the European Research Council at the European Commission in Brussels, which is amazing, and we're super excited for him. But unfortunately, that means that he can't continue with us as Working Group 1 chair. We're currently discussing what that means, what Raphael's departure will mean for the group and for the community of practice. And we're making some exciting plans. But Raphael, thank you so much for being part of our journey so far. And you've just been amazing. Now we're going to move over to Working Group 2. Working Group 2 is chaired by Selina Palm. She's based here in South Africa for the last 2 decades. And Working Group 2 is focused on exploring the important practical roles of religious actors in ending violence against children. As a key task, this working group has collaboratively designed and piloted a 10-week blended learning online course, which has been amazing. And Selina, I'm sure, will tell us all a lot more about this. Selina, I'm handing over to you.
Thanks very much, Lisa, and thank you for stealing my first couple of lines. So I'm Selina, I'm chair of Working Group 2. And there's so much I could tell you, but I only have 11 minutes. So I am going to just showcase this main component, this co-design, co-development and co-piloting of this 10-week multimedia course run virtually on faith and helping children thrive without violence. Just to say, this was quite an ambitious output in year 1, and its focus was not on doing new research, but on equipping faith leaders and practitioners who work directly in faith contexts and creating peer learning in very particular ways. The course and the group itself had a strong but not exclusive emphasis on the African continent, and I hope you'll see as I speak briefly about some of our demographics, how exciting that was. Just a quick shout out as well to my course co-lead, Dr. Nontanda Hadibe, who is on the course today. You won't get to hear from her directly, but that's because we wanted to feature some of our course graduates, who you'll hear from slightly later in this presentation. Next slide, please. So just to give a very brief overview of our group and its main activities, remembering, of course, that within the faith and GBV community of practice, we're all familiar with the intergenerational cycle of violence, the way in which children get caught up in that, and the experiences that our experiences as children of witnessing and experience violence often play into the continuation of a violent cycle of experiences. So just to give a very brief overview, we had 325 members in our group, signed up from 62 different countries across 5 continents, and 26 of these countries were within the African continent. So just a wonderful range. 100 of these participants contributed to then an in-depth online survey, and based on those interests, skills, and experience that they themselves indicated, they were invited into a range of other projects, either a series of roundtable discussions. We had 3 roundtables around course design, content, and approach. We also invited people who are interested members to provide a course contribution, an audio-visual recording, or to apply to be on the course pilot itself in 2025. And we received over 80 applications from just within Working Group 2. As a result, we selected 30 participants from 17 countries. Again, strong representation from the African continent, and 28 participants graduated just last month. So we're going to feature those in a moment. Alongside this main activity, just obviously a few other things that we did. We had quarterly working group meetings open to all of the members, as well as a COP-wide event, which was focused specifically on survivor-led approaches, which was a core plank as well around the course itself. And finally, being launched today is our learning brief on child safety in faith communities. This was explicitly co-created with our course participants and course contributors. And we're really proud of that learning brief, which you'll be able to find later on in this session. Next slide, please. So I just want to take a moment to acknowledge and appreciate the wide diversity of our 34 course contributors. Each one of these people voluntarily contributed from their own personal and professional experience. They spanned 18 countries, 5 continents, and 5 different faith traditions. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge their commitment to make these audiovisual contributions. They chose passionate topics that they were passionate about, and they also drew in aspects of their own personal stories to the course, and storytelling was a really important component of that. Next slide, please. So I have this really bad tendency. I realize when I look at Raphael's slides that I try and put far too much on my slides. So please don't try to read all of these. Lisa's laughing at me. What we found when we surveyed participants and our graduates themselves is their insights, their valuable insights about the impact of the course on them and their lives. And I've tried to highlight just a few of those quotes and reflections from participants on this slide. We see personal shifts that are made on how child discipline was re-understood, not as control, but as connection, enabling people to rethink what they had inherited around good parenting and how to disrupt those cycles when they can become damaged. Critical reflection also took place on their own faith beliefs. We explored both negative beliefs and ways in which beliefs can do harm, but also positive beliefs. We reflected on a deepened understanding of the impact of different forms of violence in children's lives, shaped by survivor voices of how it had affected them, and insights from a range of diverse religious traditions, looking at both differences and similarities. So you can see from the quotes here how to get faith communities involved, how to come to terms with our own experiences and hearing other people's experiences, and challenging faith leaders in particular to reflect maybe on what they have been taught and what they want to pass on. Next slide, please. Just to say, I'm giving these little insights. We haven't written this up yet as a research report. It's really interesting when you do a course that's about sharing learning. You actually also learn a lot through that process. And we hope in the future that this will be something that we do. So I'm just giving little snippets, but it was really interesting how many valuable insights came up about what was learned from peers. So participants here on this slide highlighted the specific value of the course design, structure and approach. And whilst I don't have time to say much about that today, it was a 10-week blended learning course, so a hybrid model, which emphasized the importance of us learning together, that each one of us has things to learn, but also things to teach. So a decentralized model of learning, using small groups with participants who are themselves moderators, creating safe space for interactive dialogues, and centering a range of different lived experiences and personal stories. This idea of democratizing the classroom comes from a Freirean decolonizing approach, and this was held alongside a self-directed online platform, which was very important for people who might struggle with internet access, and people were able to catch up and repeat activities in their own time. So we see here the highlight of the live Zoom sessions, the real-time engagement and spaces for connection, the holding by moderators and by the leaders of empathy and acceptance within the space, allowing people to feel safe to bring their own stories, and the diversity of regions, but also of religions. One of the insights here, I specifically love the contribution about how children are rarely seen as having a voice in African contexts, and how abused female children's voices go unnoticed in such environments. And this was one of the themes that was particularly powerful, how children are often seen and not heard, and how our experiences of being not seen and not heard as children can influence our behaviors as adults. So just a few short insights there. If we can have the next slide, please. And I promise this is my last busy slide. Graduates really highlighted particular standouts from the course and how they've taken this into their lives, their professional lives and their personal lives, gaining skills and enabling them to carry out different actions. They highlighted the empowering aspect of feeling connected to others, not feeling so isolated and alone. Paradigm shifts that they experienced in how to work with faith leaders. And I particularly love this comment here from one of our Muslim participants, who highlighted working with imams to reflect on play and the role of play. How does the Prophet play with children? One elderly imam told me, no one ever asked us about how the Prophet played with children. We only talk about punishment. And says that moment felt like the start of a paradigm shift. Next slide, please. So this picture highlights our 28 course graduates. And whilst we don't have time to hear from each of them today, unfortunately, I hope you will join with me in celebrating their achievement. And many of them are on this call today. What I'd like to do now is hear very briefly just from two of our graduates, Charles from Kenya and Susie from the USA. And I'm now going to play a 6-minute clip that's just their reflections on the course. So Taniko, when you're ready, just playing that video, please.
My name is Salim Charles. from Nairobi, Kenya. I work with an organization called Reimagining New Communities, which is a peace building and communication organization working with children, schools, and churches in Kenya. And I'm privileged that I was part of the, participants who went through this course for 12 weeks. And so what I got from this course is, it was nothing short of transformation, both for me and also the kind of work that I do. But what really stood out for me was how powerfully the course helped me to understand ways in which spiritual abuse and, silence and harmful norms, they erode what we need, what we always call about, safety and dignity of children, even in terms of, churches where I work mostly. And so whenever I listened to contribution from, the course contributors, those who have been survivors and also faith leaders, all this reminded me that safeguarding is not just about policy, it's relational, and it also needs to be based on theology, on the Holy Book, and it's deeply necessary when we are doing all those kind of work that we do in the spaces. And also that the concept of hands that help. And so when our work is grounded in love and care and faith, protection then comes automatically. And so there is that need, not just children to be included, but also to have presence and, and listened to. And, and also we have belief in their agency and all that. And so those are some of the most valuable takeaway that I did, and intentionally on how to create safe spaces where children can express themselves and not just be talked to, because most of the time that's what we do. And this has already influenced the design of my work. This Saturday, I'll be holding an expression workshop for children. And so I just want to be able to use some of the skills and some of the, knowledge that I gained and be able to help these children and support a safe environment.
So grateful for this opportunity to share some of my reflections about the course. But before I do offer a trigger warning. My reflections come from a place of child sexual abuse. My perpetrator was my father, who was a prominent ecclesiastical leader in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So no more than a few years old, the abuse began, and for decades, I carried that shame like a corpse strapped to my back. Churches, faith communities, families, they're supposed to protect children, but too often they become safe grounds for predators due to protections offered by religious organizations. That's why this course, Faith in Helping Children Thrive Without Violence, isn't just academic to me, as I am a PhD candidate studying these subjects. It's a reclamation, a reclaiming of everything stolen from survivors like me, in the hopes that children do not have to experience what we have. So let me tell you why this course matters. First, access. For survivors, poverty is often a cage. Healing costs money. Justice costs money. I could go on and on, et cetera, et cetera. When trauma is your full-time job, tuition fees can be locked doors. But this course was free because someone out there decided this educational effort was worth funding. That alone is radical. For the first time, I didn't have to beg for a seat at the table. The table was set for me. Second, community. Survivors know isolation like a second skin. Come forward and your own family might call you a liar. Your faith community might exile you. But here, academics, lawyers, pastors, policymakers, all learning beside survivors. No hierarchies, no performative pity, just raw equal humanity. For once, I wasn't a case study. I was a collaborator. My pain became a compass, not a stigma. Third, respect. In most classrooms, the moment I say I'm a survivor, the air changes. I see it and feel it, the discomfort, the doubt, the quiet dismal. But here, I spoke and the room leaned in. No one cut me off with jargon. No one hid behind diplomacy. When I said, this sounds noble, but harms children, they listened, because survivor testimony isn't an add-on here. It's the heartbeat of the work. So Selena and Nantando didn't just teach us, they were one with us. The combination of activism, the years of academic scholarship, wisdom of decades in the trenches, and weaving real-time perspectives and material from individuals all over the world was phenomenal. Together, this unique teaching paradigm and platform showed us how to strategize a blueprint for change. So this course taught me my nightmares could be a bridge, that my story, our stories, aren't just wounds, they're weapons. So for survivors watching or who are listening, this is your invitation to be part of change. To allies, this is your call to listen and not save. And to funders, this is proof that free isn't charity. It's an act of dismantling the systems that keep survivors shackled. So 5 minutes, isn't it enough to explain what this course gave me? It really isn't. But I'll leave you with this. For the first time, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a torch. And this course, it handed me the flame. And for that, I will be forever grateful for. So thank you.
I could probably just end there, and in a way I will. Just highlighting, and we don't necessarily need to put my slides up. The launching of our co-created learning brief, focused on, as Susie has so poignantly articulated there, child safety in faith communities. How do we move from words to action? This features insights from 15 of our different course graduates and links to videos, which were the heartbeat of our course, from 4 of our different course contributors, featuring dialogues with different actors, faith leaders, NGO workers, survivors, and theologies that do harm. Finally, as we move into year 2, and I see the slides are up, so if we can just move to the last slide, please. I think Lisa's going to talk about this a little bit more. The plan as we move into year 2 is to consolidate and share some of the many learnings of year 1 that have come from our graduates. Moving on to the final slide, please. But also to open the course up to new intakes and continue to accompany our alumni, such as Charles and Susie, as they pass on what they have learned, as well as continue to learn together. And the picture on this slide is from Charles's Child Expression Workshop, which he ran 2 weeks ago with 25 children aged 7 to 14 from 3 different churches. This slide shows a few ideas that we're discussing. I'm not going to talk about them now, but it's so inspiring to see how all of our graduates from multiple countries are running practical activities in their faith communities, inspired by what they learned, with Buddhist monks for friendship benches for children, to working with imams in Pakistan, to Charles's work with children, and Susie's work as a survivor. At the heart of our working group is supporting and equipping practitioners to learn from and to support each other. So if you're interested in this course, please check out our link to be able to apply for our new intake, which will hopefully be starting in September. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Selena. And for everyone who shared, I'm a bit conscious of time, so we're going to move on to Working Group 3, which was chaired by Nora Khalaf-Ilej and co-chaired by Sarah Marceau. Now, Working Group 3 focused on identifying barriers and opportunities in effectively communicating about GBV, specifically between faith actors and policymakers. Nora could unfortunately not be with us today, but she did a recording, so at least I know exactly how long that will take. So if we can please play that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Lisa and Liz and Raphael and Selena. And thank you to the entire SVRI team for all the hard work to make this community of practice possible. It's been a really great collaboration throughout the year. For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Nora Khalaf-Ilej, and I have the absolute privilege to share Working Group 3 together with my co-chair, Sarah Marceau. It's been an incredible journey, and I'm very excited to share some of the highlights with you right now. So let me just share my screen. Here we go. All right. So GBV communication between policymakers and faith leaders is a really complex issue. And we uncovered new challenges and new barriers under each layer. Communication in general is a very difficult thing. It's an art in and of itself, and it requires much practice. Religion is highly sensitive, and so is gender, and so is violence. And now if you combine all four of these, well, then you have our working group in essence and the challenges that we were addressing. Over the past 12 months, we've had so many diverse perspectives being shared and stories about GBV communication. We had working group discussions, surveys, a lot of guest speakers, but a lot of different formats to share these stories. Guest speakers joined us from all over. Dr. Faizat Batmus Busari from the Strategic Initiative for Women in the Horn of Africa joined us, as well as Leslie Modimo from Zimbabwe shared insights with us. Virginia Mansiti from the European Commission joined us, as well as Dr. Heba Salah from the Egypt Darul Ifta. And of course, our co-chair Sarah shared many of her experiences from her own work with Musawa. And all of these conversations allowed us to put together a series of outputs. We co-produced a journal article collecting and showcasing first-hand accounts of GBV communication between policymakers and faith leaders in practice. We created a practical toolkit for practitioners with guiding steps through these complex and difficult conversations. And it comes with a short infographic that is just 2 pages long and really easy to have on hand. And finally, we try to synthesize our main learnings into a policy brief. And policy briefs can be dense and feel overwhelming. That can be difficult to digest. So we are very excited to say that we were also able to create a 3-minute explainer video that is very easily digestible and shareable. And you can find all of these outputs on the SVRI website. And we encourage you to use them in your practice and share them with your colleagues. And we would, of course, love to receive your feedback and continue to improve these tools. We're looking at them not as static outcomes, but as living resources that we can continue to improve. If I had to summarize our key themes, our key learnings in 3 words, I would say legitimacy, literacy, and links. So the issue of legitimacy came up a lot. It came up very early on in our working group discussions. It's all about the question of who has the authority to discuss GBV in religious contexts, whose knowledge is considered valid and whose isn't, and why is that? What if an official from an international human rights treaty, like CEDAW, for example, wants to challenge a state representative who is saying that religion is the reason why anti-GBV legislation in their country cannot be adopted? What if this official feels no legitimacy to challenge these arguments or to speak on religion in general? And this is the reason why gender discriminatory laws are often packaged in the language of religion, because it makes it harder to criticize them. It gives them legitimacy. It puts a monopoly on legitimacy. And our working group tries to put tools in place to instead democratize legitimacy, to speak on issues related to GBV, even in the context of religion. The second is literacy. And of course, I speak about religious literacy. And it does not refer to the theological knowledge of religion, but the understanding of how religions function in society. The knowledge that religions are internally diverse, they're very context specific, they're subject to change. The same religion can be practiced entirely differently in 2 countries, even between different households that are right next to each other. Acquiring religious literacy opens a door to legitimacy. It gives you more legitimacy in conversations. And religious literacy, it gives you the societal knowledge to make an educated argument on religion's role in GBV prevention and response. And that's such an important point. It gives you a means to have a fact-based conversation, because we expect this in any other development discipline. We expect fact-based conversation, so why not here? But let me jump back to the first one, legitimacy, for just one moment, because I just told you that religious literacy is one source of legitimacy, but there are others that we discussed that came up. One big one was lived experiences, especially when it comes to GBV survivors. Lived experiences are some of the most powerful sources of evidence and legitimacy that exists, and we hope in year 2 we can highlight these stories more. Other sources of legitimacy we discussed were legal frameworks, women's rights frameworks, health and medicine, shared values and goals. And all of these different forms of legitimacy help give authority, or give the feeling of, you know, a door into the conversation rather than just checking out of it. Now, the last L that is a key theme of our working group and a key learning that came out is links. And by those, we mean the links between, of course, faith leaders, faith actors, and policymakers, and the need to establish formal, regular communication channels. Some of these exist already, but we always are thinking about how to bring more people to the table, how to make sure nobody's left out. We're always asking, you know, who's missing right now, who needs to join next time. And our goal is to provide tools that enable both sides to continue conversations constructively rather than letting them stall when religion is invoked. And this past year has laid a crucial foundation. We've identified the need to strengthen legitimacy, build religious literacy, and forge stronger links between those who shape policy and those who guide communities. And our outputs, the toolkits, the policy brief, the video, the journal article, the infographic, they're not just findings, they are practical instruments designed to assist us in these conversations, in this vital mission to enhance these conversations. And we urge you to use these resources, to pilot them in your context, to engage in these conversations, and to share your feedback, of course. Now, in year 2, we want to continue this shared learning journey and invite you to join us. And we are hoping to establish more dedicated focus groups within our working group, allowing for more in-depth engagement on specific aspects on GBV communication. A key activity will involve producing case studies using the toolkit in practice, but also surveying policymakers and faith leaders to discuss the toolkit in real-world scenarios. And of course, we will continue our commitment to disseminating all of the outputs widely and ensuring that this vital knowledge reaches those who can benefit from it the most. So please join us for year 2, because our work is far from over. And thank you so much.
Thank you to Nora in her absence, and to Working Group 3 with the amazing work and outputs that they produced that I really encourage you to go and take a look. It's just so usable and practical. We ran over time a bit, so I'm very briefly just going to share what we have planned for the coming year. Like Liz shared, we have another year of funding, which is amazing. And we're going to think further than just a year. We want to do 3-year planning, but co-collaboratively with all COP members, really try and work on developing the COP strategic vision and kind of determining the long-term direction for the community of practice. So we're going to focus on consolidating relationships, deepening learning, and enhancing collaboration. Yes, thank you, Tanuka, if you can put up that last slide. We're going to do some new things. For example, we're going to have sacred storytelling events. We'll do the networking events, of which we did a few at the start of the year, and some new ideas. So I want you to please keep an eye on your email and to the invitations that will send. Yes, and like Selena said, the short course from Working Group 2 will run twice, once this year and once next year. So to close this webinar, thank you so much to our speakers, to Liz, to Raphael, to Sinetemba, to Nbantu, Selena, and Nora, for being here with us via video. Thanks so much to Tanyiku, who organized all the tech stuff, to the various interpreters. A big thank you to Clara and to Claire. They got all the outputs copy edited and uploaded onto the website. You'll see the QR code and the link here on the screen that takes you to the page on the SVRI website that has all the outputs. Just scroll there, you'll find it. Thank you to all of you who attended today. We're really delighted that you could find the time to be with us. And I want to remind you, like I remind you every time, please do register to become a member of the community of practice so that you get all the news we sent and the invitations. And we're all really excited to journey with you for another year. Thank you, everyone.